Here I am. I am Sheila Katzman, and we're in this informal cyberspace area here. I see no stars though. Yeah. There's a star right here. Oh yeah, she's here. You'll hear from her in a little while. And I'm the president of IAWRT USA. That's the International Association for Women in Radio and Television. And I'm gonna go over to Frida.
Hello, I'm Frida Worden. I'm in Canada on Denman Island off the west coast of British Columbia. And I produce a radio show called Wings, Women's International News Gathering Service. And I'm also involved with International Association of Women in Radio and Television.
She's our former president of the International Association of Women in Radio and Television.
Long time ago.
Howard.
I'm Howard Katzman, documentary filmmaker, international development consultant, political.
All right. And now we go to the star.
Okay, I'm Lady Ann Salem. So friends call me IC. I'm currently the communication officer of International Association for Women in Radio and Television. That is after I got released from jail. I am again the communication officer. So I also got elected to the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines as one of its 15 national directors. Also after I got released from jail. And I think, yeah, because I think that my case has been a case of persecution of press freedom in the country, and also persecution of our freedom of expression, and maybe that's why they elected me.
But that's great. That's great. And Maria, what's her name?
Maria Ressa.
Maria Ressa, who was incarcerated also sometime, mentioned you recently, which is really so good. Frida, we're so happy to have Lady Ann here. Sometimes we couldn't sleep because, you know, shocked. I think you were on a program with us before. And
Biennial.
Yes.
Yeah, we were together on December 5 for the biennial.
Yeah, and this is coming up is Press Freedom Day, World Press Freedom Day next Monday, 3rd of May, right? And we're really happy that you're here. This is an informal setting, thanks to Yvonne O'Neill, who is with the Episcopal Diocese of New York. And it says here that we're on one boat.
On one boat?
One boat. We're in one boat.
Well, if you consider the world as one boat, then we are all in one boat. And we might be springing a leak. So, yeah, we're in one boat in that way. But we all have different boats. Yeah.
That we create one big boat with it, right?
All right, we'll hook them all together.
Who's the captain? Who's the captain? There's always one captain only. That's kind of a problem.
You're kidding. You're kidding. Well, they'll probably say that it's God, right? But we could say it was Gaia, or we could say there's a lot of people who think they're captains, but they aren't really.
Because I don't know who's leading this boat and where they're leading us. And why do we not have a say?
That's interesting. Lady Ann.
Oh, yeah.
Who is leading the boat? I don't know. What if we take turns? What if we take turns and lead the boat? Because so we're the Philippines, US, and Canada. That's a hell of a boat.
A lot of people on it too, to take turns.
That's what diversity is about, I suppose.
You know that poem by Yeats, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. And that might be appropriate in this
I did
situation.
that in school. I did that in school. I did that as a small child, actually. You know it, Lady Ann?
I have no experience in leading the
No
boat, but
experience.
I'm sure you are all very capable. I'd be
Yeah.
happy to assist you there.
Oh,
So
that's
When I read the one boat, I thought of Moby Dick with everyone, a real diverse crew on it, but all sidetracked by the singular suicidal vision of the Captain Ahab to everyone's detriment. So I'm much too cynical. Maybe we
okay,
need more captains.
but we can reverse that. We can do, reverse role with the captain. Since there are like 4 of us here, the boat is not going to sink. 3 women? Oh God, no! It will never sink.
I'll sink.
It will never sink. All right. So I suppose we can look a little bit at fresh World Press Freedom Day.
let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Where do we begin, Lady Ann?
Maybe with the theme for this year, UNESCO's theme is information as a public good.
Right.
Yeah, because we've been 1 year into the pandemic and there's been the infodemic that surrounds it. Right. There's been from the last year we've experienced like a lot of misinformation and there are disinformation as well. And right now there's vaccine nationalism where there are countries being accused of promoting their vaccine over others or maybe deliberately talking against the vaccines, especially those coming from Europe, and just so they could promote their own. Yeah, and Sheila and I were talking earlier. We'd love to have to be shot with the Cuban vaccine, the one that's not made for commercial purposes. Yeah, but we don't have a choice. We don't have a say in this because it's the pharmaceuticals companies that are dominating. This is they're dictating supply and demand. So yeah, as well, and for journalists and news reporters like us, so that's important because we're part of that problem too. Right now, we need to be vaccinated too, and there's still a lot of that misinformation and disinformation going on. And in the Philippines, though, and in addition to that is while there is a pandemic and us being this country being having the most cases and probably the worst performance in preventing the spread of of COVID-19, we are experiencing human rights violations left and right, and that's just like what happened to me in no less than International Human Rights Day. Couldn't be more ironic. And that was also the last day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So this is happening alongside the pandemic and the infodemic, and that makes it all the worse.
So you're saying that World Press Freedom Day doesn't really mean anything to the Philippine government?
Well, I don't know, but it seemed to me like International Human Rights Day didn't mean anything to them when they arrested seven people who they think are critical of the government, who they think who they belong to organizations critical to the government. And the Philippines is a democracy, as we all know. You're not supposed to be punished or made to suffer for your beliefs, your association. There should be none of that, but there is a lot of that here in this country. And when I experienced it myself, I think that became a realization to many that yeah, it could happen to them too, because it rarely happens to somebody who lives and stays in the national capital region in Metro Manila. So when it happens to people outside the national capital region, a lot of people don't usually pay heed to these human rights violations. So, yeah.
So probably the people who are listening to this won't know what your role as a journalist is. Maybe you'd say a little bit about what your journalism is like.
Yeah, I am the editor of Manila Today. It's an online news publication since 2014. But ever since I finished my degree in college, I've been with Tudla Productions that produces mostly social documentaries about the plight of the people, the underprivileged in the country. So even when I was still in college, Tudla Productions has been repeatedly red tagged by this government for having produced the documentary about the Hacienda Luisita massacre. And I think some of you may be familiar with that when striking.
Say it slower for the listening audience.
Yeah, Hacienda Luisita massacre. It happened in 2004. I was still a college student then. An alternative video group, Tudla Productions, was there during the strike. So they were the only ones there who was able to document what happened. So the striking farmers, the farmers were given only 9 pesos a day then. So that was 2004. 9 pesos is like maybe 20 cents a day, not every day, and also not every day. So they may be given 10 Mondays or 10 days to work in a month. So that's all they get. And they're called stockholders of the, when the land was turned into a corporation, they were that. So they were called stockholders, given only 10 Mondays to work. So when they launched a strike, so it was largely successful until that infamous day of the massacre when they were fired upon from the inside of the gates. So there were military tanks inside. There were police. The landlord who owns this is from the family who is also in the local politics, and then they also became the president of the country. So they were saying then during that time that no, it was the farmers who fired upon us. So but if it was not for the video of Tudla Productions, it couldn't have been shown what the real events, how the real events transpired, how the farmers were running for their lives away from the gates where the bullets are coming from. And for an agricultural country, for a rice eating country, a farmer who cannot buy his own rice, that's the greatest irony. That's the greatest injustice of all. And if you don't have rice, I don't know how you can buy bullets. So if not for these kinds of alternative media outfits, there are a lot of stories there that are hard to be told or cannot be told, or maybe a different official narrative could have been put out there. And I've always been part of that kind of media organization in the Philippines. I think it was part of me being idea what I learned from college. I think I've somehow felt that no, I can't work for a gatekeeper that is a corporate media organization, or work for the interests of a corporation, even if I'm still doing my job as a journalist. Maybe that's something that I couldn't swallow. So despite the hardships and having to put up these independent media organizations on our own, that's what I've endeavored to do for the last maybe 15 years of my life. So and then the arrest on December 10 happened, December 10 last year.
Good.
Lady Ann, I facilitated with a colleague a workshop for Filipino journalists through JOLA. And one of the major enactment of that workshop was your story. I don't know if anyone told you. It was your story they enacted. And even though my colleague was from the Philippines, even though I didn't know the language, the emotions were there, and what people were feeling in their bodies was also there, right? And that this happened on International Human Rights Day and the end of the
16
16 days of activism against gender violence seemed as if it was sending a message to the rest of us in the world, not only to women in the Philippines, but it's to the rest of us in the world. And that's why the outcry was so, you know, huge, you know. You mentioned and I'm losing my train of thought. You mentioned that if the Filipino government can do this on that day, what then? Something to that effect. Press freedom. It would make us really scoff at press freedom. I actually never really paid press freedom any mind freedom. I don't pay it any mind because one of our members here in the US who is from Turkey, Press Freedom Day 2 years ago, 2019, she turned up for something at the United Nations, and they took her and the members of her organization, which is originated from Turkey, took away their ID because overnight, Erdogan, the Turkish president, instructed his ambassador to keep them out of the UN. And you just need one member state to say, we don't want that group here. And there's no debate, no nothing. You know, Rebecca and I were there, and it's like Rebecca was shocked that something like that could happen. So if we talk about press freedom, which is not a treaty, so to speak, right, at the UN, it's a, what do they call it? It's not a resolution. It's
part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
It is. No. The way it came about. 1991 was when this came about in Africa. A lot of the resolutions and stuff that we have came out of Africa, and this one was coined at the Namibia conference because African journalists rise up and said, we want some kind of freedom and protection, right? That's where it came out of. And I think it's 1973 or somewhere thereabout, I do have it, that it became an international document, so to speak. And what is interesting is that it made full circle for 30 years. 30 years would be 1973.
91.
91. Yeah, full circle back to Namibia that is hosting this massive celebration this year of the
Press Freedom Day?
Yes. What boggles my mind about press freedom is if we as journalists can't tell the stories of the disenfranchised and whatever it is to make their lot better so that everybody can rise above where they are, then where is that freedom? Where is that freedom? Like, you know, when one of our members, the woman from Bangladesh, whose husband was chopped up and she lost a finger, she was in our film, what's the name of the film Nupur did?
Velvet Revolution.
Velvet Revolution. If we can't really do the work that we were trained to do, we pay a lot of money to go to college to get a journalism degree, for God's sake. And we're being killed. And Human Rights Day, we lost one of our young journalists in Afghanistan. what do we do? What can we do? So what is this press freedom? I really want to dissect it. Frida, you can like a long time, Howard, you can chime in, what is this? It's not an interview session where you're chatting.
I'm confused about it. I'm confused about press freedom because how do I put it? It's a great thought when you hear it straight that everyone should be, but yet here in this country, we're hearing what is a journalist, what is news, what is noise. We have a lot of things passing for news, putting out all sorts of crazy things that people actually believe. Some of them have certain auras of legitimacy, but do they get the same freedom as, say, you do? Or who decides which is legitimate, which isn't legitimate? And then we'll go even further into the trolls and the people who are attacking people. And do they get press freedom? And where's the line?
Right.
Everyone can be a journalist. Everyone can be a journalist.
Well, I'm thinking back to the situation in the Soviet Union back in the day when the formal media was all controlled. And that's happening in a lot of places. Just trying to do it in the Philippines. It certainly happens in China and so forth. But in the Soviet Union, there was an industry, I'd call it industry, called samizdat. And people would actually type things and use carbon copies and circulate them clandestinely. And it was something that could be done usually without the government knowing who did it, where it came from, and or even that it might be circulating. But now we're using these online media that are completely transparent to surveillance. I gather there are some online media that are being created that are supposedly not transparent to surveillance, but the ability to skirt. When the kids who were in college recently were telling me there's something called the panopticon, and that's the eye that sees everything. And real press freedom would be to be able to do everything out in the open, and sub rosa press freedom would be to be able to do things clandestinely. But when you can't do either, then what?
And the very nature of the internet isn't private. There's no way it can be private because they call it metadata, but a lot of information comes in the clear saying that we're talking together. They may not be able to get the actual content, but they can find out enough just from time, place, and a lot of other things that come through. So there is no privacy.
And when we talk about the theme for this year, information for the public good, and I'm going to address this in the Uganda situation event, I think of who is the public, and as a journalist, I see myself as from the public. So I'm part of the public, but I'm a journalist. And so when I go out in a story, like when I was in newsrooms, even if I didn't like the story, I began to like the story because my job was to get the facts from that story. So then it becomes an interest for me also, right? So the story is my story to share so people knows what's going on. You talk about COVID in your country, Lady Ann. Oh, I'm in New York City. I'm in New York City. My neighborhood, all of downtown Brooklyn, was on the lowest spectrum of COVID. You go outside now, the restaurants are in the street, they're crowded. It's just been going on. You wouldn't know that there was COVID around in my neighborhood, Frida.
No, you could tell it was somewhat of a distancing. outside, but there were a lot of people tonight, Saturday night,
A lot
at
of
the
people
bar
on
on the
the
street.
weekend nights. But
It was like
people
a street
wear
party.
masks. People wear masks and so on.
Yes.
Now, when we talk about you opened Lady Ann with misinformation and disinformation, which is a term I use a lot when I was with the UN. Because in places of war, that's what you get a lot of. And you do have journalists also who work against the grain of facts, right? Because we saw that. They fan the flame of the war. They get 2 shillings here and there to do that. But for the rest of us, when we talk about the public good, I ask the question, who is the public and who's good? So you get my meaning? Who's public and who's good? Even at Pacifica Radio, when I was there, and Pacifica is the largest network of community radio stations globally. There's no match. They decide what you cover. You don't cover murders, deaths, robbery, that sort of thing. But when, I don't know if you ever heard about O.J. Simpson. I didn't even know who was Juice, Frida, because I'm not a US, I didn't know who Juice was. And the news director was talking about, we've got to do something because they're trying to pin this thing on Juice. And I was really naive because I thought he was talking about juice or orange juice, because they say OJ and then they say juice, right? I had no idea that this guy, was OJ Simpson or knew anything about him for that matter. Yeah, I was very naive. And
no, from a different culture.
Yeah, it's culture, yeah. And but they chose at that time to put a little bit in the news about the car chase. But we don't cover that, right? So, and the freedom of speech is also that you can't use 4-letter words and certain words because one, the media house could lose their license and could be shut down, right, Frida? You're a veteran in this.
Right, that's the puniest little kind of censorship, but that gives them a hook to do something.
Exactly, and then you would lose a job. And there's the other big aspect of freedom of the press, and chime in anybody, is the corporations, if you try to dig up stories, like what happened to the woman in Velvet Revolutions with the Panama Papers. If you dig up stories, which is for the public good, then, corporations runs government. Yes. And so if well, let me not say anything because I don't know anything about how this program goes. If a company like McDonald's, we lost Frida, she'll come back. If a company like McDonald's said to their whomever they give money to, I'm talking about the US now, then they're coming down on that country. I saw it happen to my country, Jamaica. We saw it in South Africa with McDonald's. When McDonald's took South Africa to court, South Africa won. They took Jamaica to court, Jamaica won. The only thing, we have different governments now. McDonald's is everywhere and our people are obese now. Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's, yeah, that's what they want. Everybody have diabetes and that sort of thing. So when we talk about the freedom of the press, I question what freedom, what press, how are the themes chosen each year? For the public good, we still have those gatekeepers who are governments and the UN and corporations that are coming up with these themes for us and say, this is what you must think about, which is what we do in the media, tell people to think about. and not how to think. So it's I think we need to revisit World Press Freedom Day, and we need to make government more, because it's getting worse in many countries.
Yeah.
In Cameroon, in the Philippines, Afghanistan. I had a long talk with 2 days ago, who has gotten death threats right now, 5 of them. And the person, whomever sent the death threat, according to the police, is 30 minutes from where she is.
Yeah.
Right? So she said something like any day now.
Mhm.
And to hear that, so she has to be silent, right? Even though she met, I don't know if I should be talking about that, but yeah.
There were some interesting things that I'd like to follow up on what Lady Ann said. One was, if you would be kind enough to define the difference between misinformation and disinformation, because there's subtle differences,
Yeah.
but difficult differences, please.
Yeah, misinformation is spreading false information, but disinformation is when you do that with malice, with intent. So sometimes you know, especially during the pandemic and the lockdown last year, we have group chats with our family members and asking them how they are, and they send us stuff like, "Oh, use ginger, you'll be cured from COVID. Use this and that." So those are not true. Those are misinformation. They did not know that they are not true. They actually think that they're helping by spreading those things around. But then it becomes disinformation when you purposely put out these things to confuse the public, to delude them from the truth. And that's that's what we usually see with trolls and with a lot of some paid bots and all those other technological resources that, to me, at the end of the day, whoever paid them to do that, what I see is that the government benefits from them. The government benefits from what they do, and that's really very suspicious to me.
I have found that rumors proliferate when there's a lack of information. And I think what we're saying overall is that we have delinquent leadership that isn't giving us the information we desperately need. So people fill it in with ginger.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, last year when we were talking about that in an IAWRT webinar, so Ma'am Linda, the chapter head from IAWRT Philippines, she was talking about disinformation, and then that some of them coming from the government or government officials. So Christine Ram, our chapter head from Norway, she was really, this is a world away. This is your world. This is a different world from us, because whatever the government put out here, we believe because it's credible. It's something like that. So it's a world away. Then we're literally living in a different world. So she couldn't believe that things like that are happening, or they have they have space to happen. So yeah.
I will come back.
We were probably having fairly credible information that we trusted. And then like this, with a change of leadership, we ended up in a totally different boat. And it would seem that fragile, that quick. It's shocking how weak the foundations can be, how quickly they can be demolished.
Just to follow up on what Lady Ann said about the totally different worlds. In Nicaragua, one of the reasons why I proposed that conference of South cooperation between journalists in the South and what have you, is because you, for instance, don't know anything about Jamaica, as an example. And Jamaica don't know anything about you. I know we gave you pineapples.
And Bob Marley.
Yeah, we gave you pineapples.
Free yourself from mental slavery.
And, what happened was we brought Jamaican journalists, somebody from Trinidad, etc., trying to mix. We have somebody from Peru, Chile, Colombia, all over, to meet with Africans, in particular, people from the Pacific and so on, Asia. The Jamaican and the Trinidad were in tears because they could not believe what they were hearing from African journalists. That you get your radio station burned down, that you get women journalists being killed, that you get, the U is a general U I'm talking of now, that all these things, they were shocked. They were in tears because they're like, the women control the media in the Caribbean. You get my meaning? They're owners too of media. And when they were hearing that for the first time, and there's a reason why we have the West as in the middle as mediators. They really don't want us to come together, right? And I think the only time we'll have press freedom is when South-South Corporation is, how do you say it now? Is a thing.
I think that's where Lady Ann's release was the international voice, right? And the voice of public as opposed to voice of institutions necessarily.
Yes.
And in some sense, it is the South-South cooperation. It is where we're trying to use these structures to bypass the classical gatekeeper of elites. And they do it they change it by muddying the waters, so it becomes difficult.
So this boat's been traveling for quite some time, and I think in about 7 minutes we are going to land somewhere.
Okay.
We're going to land somewhere, and yes, we're in the same boat, and we're taking turns captaining. Is it captain? Is a boat of captain?
Captaining, yeah.
Captain, yeah.
Steering.
Certainly not steering. Yeah, so we're taking turns. Who said there was a leak in the boat? There's no
Boats were on
leak in the
deck and
boat.
not in steerage.
There's no leak in the boat anymore. Do we have food on board here?
I want to say something before we close. I just want to say that we are in the same boat because even in the developed countries that have all this corporate media and that are in there oppressing the media and the people of the other countries, the people in our countries don't have that kind of information either. We don't know what's happening in the Philippines or Nicaragua or anything.
True.
And just to say that when WING started, the Women's International News Gathering Service, it's a weekly radio show now. And it's on community radio. It's on community radio because it couldn't get even on public radio, because they all said that our aim, which was to cover the global women's movement beyond the end of the UN Decade for Women, oh, that's an idea whose time has passed. We don't want to hear that. And so, like this press freedom that we have in this group is very precious, because even though it's only on community radio, it's kind of like beneath the radar, which is how we get away with it, but it's circulating information about what women are saying and doing, mainly women in different countries, to each other, and trying to keep that solidarity that we developed during that decade when we actually got to meet each other face to face, and then again in 95 and in China, trying to keep that interest that was developed in the women of the developed countries in what else was going on in the world, trying to keep that alive. And I think that's something. Well, there was a quote from Laura Flanders that I saw today on Facebook, and she said something like, the alternative media boils the pot, and the mainstream journalism inhales the steam. So, if you can just kind of get something out there then maybe it'll be picked up. Maybe, it'll get farther. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of press freedom that I have had so far. And I guess that's kind of the sum of that in a way.
Okay, we're in an age, even though there's a new administration in the United States, of something known as Trumpism, which has the disinformation that Lady Ann elaborated on, still exists with us today in the United States. So again, my call is that we need to revisit what freedom of the press means. I strongly believe that, because Frida, we don't hear what's happening in the Philippines here.
We don't hear anything about it.
I'm actually getting my news on WhatsApp. I'm talking regular daily stuff, unless I have when I lived in the UK, I know the world. Right? I know the world. We knew
the
more.
BBC.
We knew, yeah, but yeah, BBC 1, 2, 3. We know more about the United States than when we lived here.
And our newspapers have no international sections, shockingly.
Here.
Yeah.
Here. I mean, even the New York Times is weak on the international, even though they have some semblance of it. And
some of it's distorted too.
When we talk about freedom of the press, we talk about freedom of information too. I know that in China, COVID for the last year, they've had 20 cases up to last week. For the entire year. Yes. I have a colleague who we meet every Wednesday. I'm a psychodramatist, sociodramatist, theater practitioner. And we're so jealous of him. He's Australian and didn't want to go back to Australia.
But is that like India where they're not reporting it?
Pardon?
Is that like India where they're not reporting it?
No. He's doing his workshops, inviting us into his workshop. It's for 50-something people in his workshop doing the waves, right? Now the waves is a game we play in these workshops. Frida, you took one of my workshops, where when you're face to face, so you're on the floor, so you roll, somebody roll over you, and you keep rolling and rolling, right? They're doing that. They're doing that. Last week, he went back to Australia because they gave him a visa without a work permit after a year and 4 months or something like that. So they couldn't stay. And he tried to negotiate with his government to say, I don't want to be quarantined because I'm fine, right? I have been working every day in China. There's no COVID. He's so scared right now in his hotel room. He said he walks to the window 5 steps to the other side of the wall. What is giving you food? He doesn't know. What touches. The windows are sealed, so you can't open it to get fresh air. When he arrived in China, just before the lockdown of Wuhan province, he said they put him in a hotel, and the only thing he sees were robots. Robots brought him food, brought him sheets for his bed, brought him everything. China is way ahead of us. You know that. You're not too far from there, right? So, but that information we're not getting here. The information I sent you about the vaccine in Cuba, we don't have it on the radio yet here. Yeah. I sent it to you, Frida.
There's been a lot of medical.
I saw it from. I heard it from Medea Benjamin in an event I attended a week or two ago. Yeah,
that's the one I would want.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so what's our message for fresh? What's the name of it again? World Press Freedom Day on the 3rd of May. What's our hope and dreams for this thing?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a declaration. Yeah, we need to revisit. But when we do, for us who are trying to insist on being free, especially here in the Philippines, it should have been a given. It's a fundamental freedom, but we insist we are only free because we insist on being free. So when we come upon May 3 every year, it is time for us to be reminded of that we need to push back against the attacks against press freedom, because we're experiencing a lot of that. And also in May 5, it will be a year since the current administration here shut down the biggest broadcast network here just because they're not in good terms with each other. So there's a lot of things to remind us of why we need to continue to push back against press freedom if we are observing this day because of that. And then I guess it becomes a bit relevant, and maybe like to tie in with what Howard was asking earlier and what Frida said, it's really hard for journalists to practice press freedom, because we, like what the International Federation of Journalists always say, press freedom cannot exist if journalists exist in conditions of corruption, fear, or poverty. So it's really a hard pressed thing to hold on to. But if we don't, and then we'll have maybe nothing. There we'll have nothing to protect all other liberties of the people and their human rights.
Yeah.
Howard.
I'd like to say, oh, you're going to call on Howard next? Okay.
Howard, come to you.
I'm sorry.
What's your final word for now for World Press Freedom Day?
Well, we have to turn around and define what world press and freedom are. They sound real good together, but I think there's a lot of ambiguities that gets into Lady Ann's misinformation, disinformation. And if we can't sort that out, which we've been having trouble with, and we call it fake news, if we can't define any of these, then what does freedom mean?
Madam.
Me? I just want to say, for us in North America in particular, let's put the world back in World Press Freedom Day. We need the freedom to know what's going on in the world and not just in Hollywood and Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I noticed the one thing we never said was Section J. You mentioned Beijing. I know that's your favorite, Frida. Section J of the Beijing Platform for Action.
Yeah.
On women.
But it has to do with women's, primarily actually the representation of women in the media.
Right.
Yeah, but it didn't actually go so far as to say women's right to be the media, and as far as I can recall now, and that is something that the United States never wanted, and the Chinese never wanted, because they just wanted to control access. And I gather the Philippines is doing that too, trying to control who. Yeah, and that's why. Well, enough said.
I'm so glad to be here with friends. It's just so wonderful. Lady Ann, I'm so happy that at the last minute you could jump in and join us. And it sounded like she was having a party too. So
it's Sunday. So there are karaoke everywhere.
Yeah.
Sunday in the Philippines.
Lady Ann, we're happy that you're free. We were worried about you and COVID in jail, having these dawn raids, which they do all over the world, coming into your house, planting weapons and that sort of thing.
Warrants.
We're just happy that you're safe. We're blessed that you're safe.
So press freedom, it means your freedom.
Yeah.
Okay. So glad. Yes.
Yeah. And Frida, as usual, the executive producer of the Women's International News Gathering Service and former president of the International Association of Women in Radio and Television.
Yeah.
And Howard Katzman, a filmmaker, former documentary filmmaker and development consultant.
An all-around brilliant guy.
Yes, fabulous. And me, I'm going to be thinking about what it really means. I will dissect it, and I like what everybody said: the world, press, freedom, day.
I know what a day is.
Implementation, but it's not gonna happen. Not
What?
now. No, I'll tell you why quickly, because we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. And while we are talking about the goals, new wars are breaking out. New wars are coming out, right? So the United Nations are our governments. Your president is a member of the United Nations. You are a member of the United Nations.
No, your government is.
So it seemed like, no, but the government represents the people. You have to talk to,
Absolutely.
you have to, so why is it that these governments get away with this, and then come the GA, they're all sitting there smoking cigars, having caviar and champagne.
You said this is the 30th anniversary of World Press Day.
Yes.
Has anything changed in 30 years? And where will we be in 30 more years?
A lot has changed. A lot has changed. Have changed, whatever. Because we have more women journalists now in places where they weren't any before. Am I right, Frida? There are female journalists.
So although the numbers are decreasing again.
It's exactly. It's declining. So thank you all. And we need to get off this boat. So let's
bail.
Drop people off in the Philippines. Ta-ta, don't get your feet wet.
Thank you. It was good talking to
Denman
you.
Island. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't go into your little bay on is it the Bering Strait or whatever it is? You got to take the ferry back home, right? You got to get on the ferry. For us, we're gonna just hop on the subway and we'll be home soon. So till then, I wish you all some great inspiration on World Press Freedom Day, whatever that is for you.